I'm Lynn George, the chair of Modern Culture and Media, and I want to welcome everybody to Stars in His Pocket, a conversation with Samuel Delany and Kara Keeling. That event title derives from one of Samuel Delany's books, perhaps in fact my favorite of all of your books, if I had to try to pick a favorite, which is difficult. So it derives from the title of the book called Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand, a wonderful book title. But it's also, I think, a particularly appropriate title for this particular event, Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand, because I believe it suggests something about both of tonight's participants. Samuel, or as he's known, Shep Delany and Kara Keeling, right, two brilliant writers and cultural critics whose work, each in its own way, in a sense, moves from the sand to the stars and back again in their engagement with both grounded material conditions, like those that determine and delimit constructions of race, class, gender, and sexuality. So from grounded material conditions to wild flights of imagination, like those that propel science fiction and fantasy, cinema and Afrofuturism, witches' flights and flights from Niverion. So through their both rigorous and imaginative, critical and creative exploration of the terms of our social reality and of other realities that we might envision, right, through cinema, through the fantastic, through figures like the black femme or the city dweller, through encounters like sexual contact or social exchange, right, in their exploration of social realities and these other realities, both Delany and Keeling provide us with ways to know and to see our world differently, and therefore with ways to begin to think about how we could see worlds of difference and different kinds of worlds. So I'm really delighted to be able to hear an exchange between the two of them. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about more about each of them. So Kara Keeling is currently a visiting professor here in the Department of Modern Culture and Media at Brown, where we are thrilled to have her. When she is not here at Brown, although we hope she will be here forever, but when she's not here, she's an associate professor in the Division of Cinema and Media Studies in the School of Cinematic Arts and in the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California. Keeling's research has focused on African American film, theories of race, sexuality, and gender in cinema, critical theory, and cultural studies. Her book, The Witch's Flight, The Cinematic, the Black Femme, and the Image of Common Sense, explores the role of cinematic images in the construction and maintenance of hegemonic conceptions of the world and interrogates the complex relationships between visibility, minority politics, and the labor required to create and maintain alternative organizations of social life. Kara is also the author of several articles published in anthologies and journals, just to name some: Keep Harl, The Black Scholar, Cinema Journal, Women in Performance, et cetera, et cetera. She's co-editor, along with Colin McCabe and Cornell West, of a selection of writings by the late James A. Sneed called European Pedigrees, African Contagions, Racist Traces, and Other Writing, and co-editor along with Josh Kuhn of a collection of essays about sound in American Studies called Sound Clash, Listening to American Studies. She also serves on the editorial boards of the journals Cultural Studies, Feminist Media Studies, and Catalyst, and she's the editor of the Moving Image Review section of the journal GLQ. Her current research focuses on theories of temporality, spatial politics, finance capital and the radical imagination, cinema and black cultural politics, digital media, globalization and difference, liberation theory, emphasis on Afrofuturism, African media, and queer and feminist media. She is currently co-editing, along with Thanmozi Soundarajan, a collaborative multimedia archive and scholarship project focused on the work of Third World Majority, one of the first women of color media justice collectives in the United States. So that book will be entitled From Third Cinema to Media Justice, Third World Majority and the Promise of Third Cinema. And she's completing her second monograph entitled Queer Times, Black Futures, a book that, of course, will appear in its own queer time, hopefully in the not too distant future. For those of you who were at Samuel Delany's talk last night, you heard Joan Kopchak's incredible introduction of his work, which I cannot even begin to match. But I can tell you that Samuel Chip Delany is an award-winning science fiction author, cultural critic, observer of urban environments, and feminist, queer, and critical race studies scholar. He was a published science fiction author by the age of 20, and he's been celebrated for creating some of the most innovative science fiction out there ever since, some much of which you can see the books around the room. From his emergence with the first book, The Jewels of Aptor, there's a beautiful old copy of it right there, from 1962, and The Fall of the Towers, with parts written between 63 and 65, up through the recent Through the Valley of the Nest of Spiders. In between those science fiction pieces, he published such important science fiction works as Empire Star, Babel 17, The Einstein Intersection, Nova, Dahlgren, Tales of Nivirion, Triton, and Stars in My Pocket, Light Grain of Sands, among others. He has also published several autobiographical or semi-autobiographical accounts of his life as a gay black man, including his award-winning autobiography, The Motion of Light and Water. And he's written about sex, cities, and histories in both fiction and non-fictional books, including, for example, the novels The Madman and Phallos, and his acclaimed book, Times Square Red, Times Square Blue, in which he draws on personal experience to examine the relationship between the effort to redevelop Times Square in New York and the public sex lives of working class men, both gay and straight, in New York City. For his incredible output, he has won Nebula Awards, Hugo Awards, Lambda Awards, a Stonewall Book Award, the Bill Whitehead Award for Lifetime Achievement, the Brudner Prize, a J. Lloyd Eaton Lifetime Achievement Award in Science Fiction, along with being inducted into the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame, and being named Science Fiction Writer of America Grand Master. He also has been the subject of a documentary film called The Polymath, or The Life and Opinions of Samuel R. Delany, Gentleman, which in fact we are screening along with the Q&A tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. in Martinos Auditorium, that's room 110 of the Granoff Center for Creative Arts, that's on Angel Street. So hopefully folks will come to that. We will also show, in addition to the documentary about Chip, a short experimental film that he himself has made called The Orchid. And finally, in addition...
That he made a long time ago.
But still worth seeing, especially worth seeing. And finally, in addition to all of his writing and film work, Chip Delany has done a great deal of teaching. He's been a professor at several universities, including the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, the University of Buffalo, Temple University, and he's had several guest professorships, visiting guest professorships like at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, University of Albany, and Cornell University. So we are thrilled that he is also visiting here with us for a one-week residency. We only wish that we could keep him longer. So I know I've gone on for a long time, but have still only told you some things about both Kara Keeling's and Chip Delany's work. But I think that hopefully you can already see why, given the kinds of cultural issues and interrogations and imaginings that they each bring together in their own work, why it's particularly exciting to bring them together for a conversation. So please join me in welcoming Kara Keeling and Chip Delany.
Well, thank you, Lynn, for that, and thank you all for coming here today. I'm hoping you can hear me. I'll try to project. But I just, sort of wanted to start by saying that, I feel wholly inadequate to the task of having a conversation with you. But I think for me, that's partially because I'm not used to these types of public conversations or public performances. And I wanted to, maybe suggest that I toss a question at you, maybe to get the ball rolling, and then we could see where we
what
go.
happens, yes.
Yeah, from there. But along those lines, when I was thinking about doing this and preparing for it, I noticed that you've done a lot of public conversations. And in fact, the public and, the being in public, out in public, those types of things are important to you. And I thought maybe it would be interesting, at least for me, to hear you talk a little bit about why that's been an important component of your life, right? So whether it's talking about public things like this, or public sex, or the notion of even Facebook, which I've heard you're on Facebook quite a bit now.
Yes.
How do you?
It's where most of my writing energy goes to, or certainly a lot of it. Why? Because it's there, and because people ask me to. People, as I used to say to people, I have round heels. I'm a pushover, and that's what one does. What one does. It always interests me what people leave out, and when I noticed there isn't a copy of Stars and of Through the Valley of the Nest of Spiders in the books there. I noticed nobody mentions the Stonewall Book Award-winning novel, that has nothing to do with science fiction, or my most recent things are a couple of as an essay and an interview in the Boston Review about basically sex among older gay men. Why do you want to talk in public about sex with older gay men? Because I'm an older gay man, and occasionally I have sex. That's why these things happen. Among the titles you get, and you get these bizarre titles, Afrofuturist, Sex Radical, and Grandmaster of Science. I think that is such a hoot. The radicalness is almost entirely a rhetorical move. It's a matter of saying things in venues where you wouldn't usually say them. That's the extent of the radicalness. The rest is stuff you do, that you just happen to do. That's I am the kind of gay man who occasionally sits in front of a room like this and talks about sucking dick, and suddenly he's a sex radical, No, I don't. What you do is you do what you do, and then and if you happen to be an articulate person, you try to articulate be articulate about it. You don't pretend. I used to tell a long time ago, and I still do when I get the chance. Is you have a sex life. You don't lose any of your dignity by talking about it. And sometimes you can help people by talking about it, and by talking about it in places where you wouldn't ordinarily do that. And that's and it's all very simple, but it gets these weird titles, occasionally, so that's for an opener for openers.
No, that's. I think for me, often, these types of situations, right, are for me just very anxiety provoking. So I think part of it, like in terms of thinking about sort of what it means to be an artist, and then also an artist who has a commitment to a certain form of like being out or being open or being in public in whatever ways. I don't know that I would say it's radical, but I would say it seems to me like there's a certain kind of commitment that one must have to be able to and to want to do that time and again, right?
And things things cause it. I mean, I was 27 years old before Stonewall happened. So I mean, I didn't grow up before Stonewall. I was, one of the reasons I moved towards writing is because I was aware, I was aware I was gay when I was 10. And I thought, well, I have heard that the arts are a little bit more, accepting of gay men than others. So that's, how that starts. I was married, and I had a wife, and I have a daughter. And why did I do that? Is because many of the gay men I knew before Stonewall, when I was a kid, when I first was getting models, that's what they did. And you imitate the people around you. That's it's as much René Girard as it is Freud. Mimetic desire. And whether it's whether it's looking out of the window, oh, they're carrying an umbrella. I think I will carry an umbrella today because it probably will rain. This, these things, spread by imitation. And then you do something else, and these are the people I will tell about this, that, or the other. And so I moved towards a bunch of people whom it was more comfortable to be out than not. Well before, somebody said, hey, this is this is something that you should do politically, because if we're all out, we can't, we are no longer, we can no longer be blackmailed. Which is a political, the political thing. And all these things build together. I wouldn't be surprised if there is less public sex since we all came out than there was before, because it did. One hates to say it, but being in the closet, did provide a certain kind of protection. But it also had a certain danger, because it meant that people got, you could, all somebody would do is jerk open the door of the closet and point it out, ha ha, and people got sacrificed by that, and that's, and so that's how those things work, and when you get at 75, you realize things have changed a lot. But in many ways, the basic structures have not, and that's, and you just, you do with them as you can. It's not, there is, if there is a bravery, or if there is a commitment to it, it's a survival. It's a commitment to survive. I don't want to be, I don't want to be killed. And sometimes it is hard to explain to a group of graduate students, for instance, who are suddenly there, what are you interested in doing in graduate school? Well, I would like to study, male sexuality and the gender problems of gay. And you realize, you want to say, hey, that's really great, but are you aware that a mere 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, if you had come and said that to the same school, they would have called the police, or whatever. That things change so quick. This country, which is a country that has been very good to me, But I also see things like, for a while we did not have a death penalty. We did not have, and then we lost that. So you can lose these things very, very easily. And you see how some of these things do get lost. You see how things do revert. How the racial, you see someone puts together a documentary on, large meetings of the Ku Klux Klan in 1927 and 1937 and 1947, and you think, wait a minute, I can remember the very first time I taught. In 1975, I went up to Buffalo, and I went into an Italian restaurant, and I sat down, and it was very crowded, and there were a lot of people eating, a lot of working class people eating, and I looked over at the table next to me, and what was I looking at in 1975? Not 1935, not 1925, but 1975. I was looking at two garage mechanics, in their gray shirts and what have you, with their names on it, and they had little swastikas in their ears, both of them, and I thought, where the fuck have I come to? Why? I'd never seen that before. Well, Buffalo at that time was the head of the American Nazi Party, and and you just walk into a pizza restaurant, and that's what you saw. And they were as serious about what they were doing, as anybody else. And it was, things are, so you talk about them, and it is necessary to say something, I think, and you don't pretend that it isn't. And you say, I'm going to talk about it because I don't want to be hurt by those people. And then you also do something else. You also listen to them. You also, if you possibly can, you engage them in conversation. You say, okay, talk to me. Tell me what's going on, and what do you think is going on? I was talking to somebody yesterday about, at dinner, and I was talking about the fact that Trump's success in the last thing did not surprise me at all. In fact, I expected it. I expected it. I would have been surprised if it had gone the other way. Here is something. Why did Hillary not win? Here is an offensive statement, but that a friend of mine made, but it's true. She did not win because she pees sitting down. That's what it comes down to. Yes, it is offensive, but the point is, it has to do with things like the country doesn't want a woman president yet, and yet at the same time, she also won by a popular majority, the largest popular majority that won over a winning in the history, And you watch people talk on Facebook or any place else, and people still are not talking about, we got to get rid of the Electoral College. It is an absolutely troglodytic institution at this point. That is just crippling. Why aren't people talking about things like that? So I mean, it's this is this, what do you do? This is I tend to. Okay, let me just stop there and go, and we'll roll around on, we will intellectually roll around on the floor here, and see what we can.
Okay, that sounds fun to do in front of all these people. But I think, I take your point about sort of the dearth of public discourse around really important things, and also how that can be a protective mechanism to be able to actually have a certain kind of visibility and a certain kind of voice. I mean, I know for me, a lot of times the people who have done that kind of work before me, I know that work carved out the space for me to be able to do what I do, whether it's like in public or just in writing, or which I think is another public form, but it feels more at least contained for me, right? Like when I'm writing, I can imagine people reading it, but I don't have to face them
Yes, yeah.
in that moment. So
Right.
I take what you're saying, to be an important part of what it means to sort of pass on something and to have a politics and to be able to participate in shaping the world, right?
Right. Can we all hear, by the way? Does this room have the acoustics? Or are there people in the back who just are wondering what's going on? Okay, I just wanted to,
You can hear?
because the room is not mic'd. We're mic'd for the guy over there, but that's all we're mic'd for. So I just wanted, and why do I ask this? Because a couple of times I have been in rooms like this, and and gone on, and somebody, the people in the last end where I said, probably what you said was very interesting, but I didn't hear a word. So that's what makes you ask these kinds of questions. Just your experience with it. I hope it's working.
Yeah. So, speaking of sort of like gender issues around Clinton or otherwise, one of the things I've been thinking about when I was thinking about talking with you, right, which comes from some of the stories that I've heard you tell, like in the Polymath or elsewhere, about how you wanted to write your first books for your wife, right? To be able to write about women in those books in a way that your wife could feel, was I don't know what the word you would say would be, satisfying, enjoying, right? That she could enjoy.
Yeah.
And I wondered whether you would say that writing in a different way about gender requires you to do something different with language. If that makes sense as a question.
I don't think it requires you to do something different about language. I do think it requires you to do something different about structuring what you allow the women characters to do. I don't think it's a matter, and then you discover places where you make mistakes. I came very, very early. I have this kind of analytical mind, and I would, and my Marilyn and I would spend a time walking around and walking across the Brooklyn Bridge, and talking about, books we read that we liked and how they worked, and somehow. When there was contact between the social classes and people learned things from one social class to another, that was usually really interesting. When people that I noticed that that characters could have three different kinds of actions. There were purposeful actions, there were gratuitous actions, and there were habitual actions. And while it was both men and women writers were very good at giving men characters, they did it almost without thinking, all three different kinds of actions. Somehow, both men and women acted, because this is the way the fictions were set up, tended not to give women characters the same range of the three different kinds of actions. They would, if the women were good women, they would be all gratuitous but no purpose and no habits. And if they were bad, they would be all purpose but no habits and no gratuitousness. And they would be femme fatales who what have, so what do you do? So what you do is you think, well, can I paint the characters with the same palette, the same palette of actions and what have you, and put them together. And sometimes you do it, and sometimes you don't, and sometimes you make it, and sometimes you don't. You have a fight between two characters, and one of whom is a woman, and you suddenly discover at the end I've actually got a fight, and it doesn't matter who wins, but you suddenly realize while you got through the whole the fight, but somehow, while occasionally he reels from her blow, she never hits him. You know. Now, is that language? Is that habit? Is that, is it a step in the right direction vis-a-vis something else? You know. So then the next time, well, I've got to use some active verbs, and make the women characters the subjects of the sentence, as well as the subject of the story. And this is how these things. And then you eventually, come up with little characters. And very, very early, I came up with something called that. If you want to try a story that really is not, just doesn't completely fall into total sexism and what have you, well, then you need a minimum 2 characters who are women, and they have to talk to each other about something other than men. Yeah, huh? Yeah, no, but it was only I did it about 20 years before Allison, and about Allison and her friend Liz read it in something called the Women in Science Fiction Symposium, and brought it back to Allison and said, "Hey, this is what we'll do for movies," And so the Bechdel rule that I invented sort of got passed on, and Allison was always very good about sort of acknowledging it. She got it from Liz, from her friend Liz and what have you. But this is the analysis this is how these things move around in the society. I don't care what it calls. The point is people do it as long as you do it. And yeah, it's fun to be able to say I figured it out, but so apparently Allison thought it came from another equally great book, about this subject, A Room of One's Own, but it didn't, or at least if it passed through. And I'm sure Woolf was aware of it too. Woolf wrote one of the most amazing science fiction novels that I think I have ever read. It feels to me like a science fiction novel. It was her only bestseller in this country, and it was a bestseller in this country. And it's the one that's it's called The Years. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful book. It's a wonderful book. In this book, a woman standing on the platform of an underground, which a subway, as they call them, looks at another woman who happens to take a little cylinder that she's never seen out of her pocketbook, and she takes the top off the cylinder and she turns the bottom of it, and this little thing of red comes up. The other woman has never seen this before. And she moves the stuff over her lips and what have you. And the other woman, for the first time, sees another woman put on lipstick in public. And you realize, hey, at some point, that had to happen. That had to happen. At another point, she looks up in the sky and sees the first airplane. At another point, two of the sisters get the first hot shower. And these all come in the 1880s. These come the 1880s, and it feels like a science fiction novel. And not only that, it was extremely popular. Leonard didn't like it. It wasn't. And it was a book that was supposed to be about the position of women in the society. And it was, and she once tried to do it. Well, she tried to do it originally with as a half essay, half fiction. Mm-hmm. And it was going to be about the partridges, and that part has actually been published. And it's fun to read that, And then she decided, no, let's take out the essay, and we'll just do it as fiction. And so she did it as fiction. It works better, she thought. But it's interesting to read the other side, and you should read it because it's a very thought out book, and it reads very fast. It's a good read. It's a big book, and it reads quickly, and it's just as beautifully written as all of her others, you know. But this is, you should, these are how these things work. And, you've got to, they are there to be talked about. And sometime we got married, my wife and I, and I am as gay as a plaid rabbit. I do not, but we were also friends, and and I wrote about this in a book called The Motion of Light and Water, one of those Hugo-winning autobiographical works. And my wife came in the door, and she was soaking wet, and she put some groceries down on the thing, and I said, well, at that time, believe it or not, we wore the same size jeans. No longer. But and I said, well, look, here's a pair of my jeans. Why don't you slip them on? And so she put them on, and they fit, and then she put her hands in the pockets. This is 1961. It was 1961, and her hands went into the pockets, and they went all the way down, and this weird look came over her face, And she, and I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "The pockets." I said, "What about them?" She said, "They're so big." Had I ever known that women and men had different size pockets in ordinary jeans back then? These problems come up from things that actually happen. And I began to think, what would happen if I had lived my entire life without pockets, without pockets that could hold more than, you get half of a pack of cigarettes in them, I would be a very different person, and you suddenly realize that what defines, your relationship, your relation, makes who you are, your relationship to food, your relationship to money, your relationship to clothing, and all of these things, and so you have to, you start putting these in stories, you start writing about them. And that changes them, First, I tried to do it in my very first book and realized I wasn't doing it anywhere near as well as I thought. I thought of them as 3 full-length novels at the time. I think of them now as 3 short novels in a book called The Fall of the Towers, in which there are a couple of places where women do have friendships with one another. And what have you. It's not that good. It's called The Fall of the Towers, and there are pockets, and you deal with all of those things. Yeah. It's very, very early, and as I said, by the time we got to 1963, I had decided that there were that probably, and my wife had too, that the most important political question was the position of women in the world, and that all of the others were based on, all the other oppressions were based on that. The kind of infantilizing that goes on with people in different races, the kind of infantilizing that goes on of people with different sexual persuasions and what have you. It is all based on that. Some things worked better and worked faster, but all this, this is, and then somebody came out. Betty Friedan, shortly after that, came out with a book called The Feminine Mystique. Mm-hmm. Brilliant book. Brilliant fucking book. But why was it brilliant? Why was it such a success? because I assume it had to have been because women would come and talk, our women friends would come and talk to us about the problems they had getting jobs, you know. And what were the problems about getting jobs? That the New York Times in the want ads would say, would advertise, there were men's jobs and there were women's jobs. There were two sections. You know, you didn't know that those were segregated by sections, and in the women's jobs, it was that they were not they were jobs for people who want for young architects or young this, that, or the other, but the job would say some typing required, and some typing required was a code for you will be some guy's secretary, you know. And they didn't want to pay for the full wages they would have to pay somebody who was actually from secretarial school and knew how to do all this stuff, you know. And so and people had decided, I remember some people, one of the things, well, they're lying to me. They don't want a person who is actually going to go up in the business. They want somebody to be a secretary. So they lie to me, I will lie to them. I type enough for my own correspondence. You know, to which, what do you deal? How do you deal with that? You know, if you're a boss, you just don't hire them. Anybody who writes back saying I type enough for my own correspondence, well, we don't want her because she doesn't want to be a secretary. You know, we want a secretary. You know, and so forth and so on, and all of these things, you know, now all of this is ancient history, and yet it's still going on in many ways. The codes change, you know, and women still don't break through, you know, break through these the quote artificial ceilings, unquote, you know, and you know, and we you know, and people don't know what to do, you know, we don't know what to do with someone running for a political office in this country, you know. And if somebody can play the Electoral College against the entire nation, you know, we have the particular, you know, fuck up that we've got, and I'm talking about the whole situation as well as the, you know, as well as the man that we have now, you know. So this is all, and it's relatively simple, I think, and yet at the same time it does require some analysis in order to figure out what is going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you were talking, I got a little stuck on thinking about what my life would be like if I didn't have pockets.
Yeah. So one of the things is you start wearing men's jeans, you know. If you need the pockets, you know, you think, can I get by without them, or you know, if you can't, then you get them, or you make your own clothes, which was I used to make clothes.
But how do you think like you would be like? So I mean, I was following what you were saying in terms of like how these sort of structures preclude the possibility for a certain kind of equality between men and women, right? Or between, you know, people of different genders, right? And then, you know, I mean, in part because I know you write fiction as well as nonfiction, but in thinking about the fiction you write, it made me start wondering whether something like, because you said in the book, you know, there were pockets, right? Whether if something like that, where you think, you know, I would have been a different person, right? If I didn't have these pockets. If that's something that would spark a kind of enterprise, a creative enterprise in a certain way, like that, if that's a kind of mode of thinking about what would be different if this one thing that's seemingly a small thing, right? You know, if that were not, if it wasn't that way.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, like as a kind of like exercise, I did start thinking, like, what does something like that do in terms of the formation of a person, but even in terms of the formation of a world?
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, well, you have to think about it. My first 5 science fiction, well, my first 4 science fiction novels, the Jewels of Actor and the 3 novels that made up The Fall of the Towers, there's not a rocket ship in one of them. You know, I thought rocket ships were amazing. You know, I thought rocket ships were really amazing, and I had to work through 4 of them before I dared to put, you know, anything resembling a rocket ship, you know, in a novel, you know. So that was my. I was too busy with the pockets, you know. I was too busy, you know, with writing about pockets and social classes and the relations between them and what have you. Yeah.
I did also look at the time.
How are we doing?
It's 6:20. So
Do we want to open this up to? Does anybody have
so.
to?
Should we open it and see if other people want to say something instead of sitting there? Yeah. So does anyone out there have anything you want to ask or add?
I got a question. I heard something you said about memory, and there's a sort of current theory that when you have a memory about something, you basically take the memory out of the box, look at it, tell something about the memory, and you put it back in the box. And then the next time you think about that memory, you're actually not remembering the original thing.
You're actually remembering what you said, and they change each time.
Well, with you, in this situation, I'm sure you've told lots of stories.
And I've told these stories many times.
And each time you tell the story, it sort of changes.
Just a little bit. And
I'm just curious how you...
Yeah, and then the question is, what does the remembering? You know, what does the memory? Where does a visual memory lie in the, you know, in the mass, in the jelly, you know, or the little filaments that go, the dendrites and the what do you call it? What are they? The axions and the dendrites and what have you. Where does it? I don't know. We don't know. You know. Somebody tried to explain to me recently, or was it Bill? Was it you, my assistant, who's sitting in the back, that dogs can remember things, or maybe it was Paul DeFilippo, that dogs can remember things for about 5 or 6 seconds, you know, and yet at the same time they learn tricks. You know, is that all muscle memory or is that all conditioning? You know, and do they remember? They remember. They live in a world where smells are much more important, you know, than they are with us. But but at the same time, they like running around with their noses to the ground and what have you, and licking up this, that, and the other. So I don't know. It's very strange.
It's almost the habits part that you said in terms of your characters, right? The actions. Habits and the third one was
gratuitous.
Gratuitous. Yeah.
Those are the ones that you don't know what causes
them.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of them are habitual, some of them are purposeful, and some of them are gratuitous.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's funny.
But when you write a quote character that it's missing one of them, everybody can see. That, you know, this is, you know, I'm not dealing equally with the you know, and a lot of that is because sometimes there are social situations in which women are not encouraged to tell why they're doing things, you know, et cetera, things like that, and so that this is. But you need to find can I find a situation in which this is important, you know? So you have to get a story where this is important to talk about these things.
In the back?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for this. It's been great. I'm curious to your earlier point about how things that we take for granted can kind of disappear pretty quickly.
Yes.
And it feels like that might be happening or is happening a lot of quarters socially and politically. And yet at the same time, we sort of see technology catching up to a lot of science fiction, or feels like it might be. People are breathlessly talking about the moment of singularity, right? Like, how do you make sense of that as a writer? This sort of, in one direction, it feels like we're regressing socially, and yet in another direction, technology, things are sort of taking off in ways that are maybe exciting and maybe scary.
I don't know. What do you make of it? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. One does what one can, and hope and tries to write about what one sees in front of them. And I think at a certain point, you do. I'm trying to write about being 75 years. I'm trying to write about being 75 years old. Why? Because I am. Although I was just telling a 20-year-old was interviewing me earlier today, and one of the things that I think I've quoted this several times from of all people, Goethe, and he said, Goethe, a man of 50 knows no more than a man of 20. They just know different things, And I think that's kind of the way it probably works. I don't think I know that much more than anybody else. And I don't that, including my 12, including a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 25-year-old or a 35 or a 50-year-old. But I did run into a woman at the Hope Club where I'm stashed by Brown University, where they would put me. Who was born who is a mere 3 months younger than I am. So we're practically the same age, and we got along wonderfully. And one of the things I've been thinking about is some anthropological studies from years and years ago about tribes where you can only be judged by your age mates. Which I think is interesting, where the people who are your own age are the people who can judge you. You don't ask people to judge someone. So a 50-year-old, you don't, the notion that you are judged by your peers. But what are your peers? A jury of his peers, or a jury of her peers, as the case may be. But what are peers? Are peers people who are the same age as you, or are they something else? Is it necessary to be the same gender? Is it necessary to be the same race? Is it necessary? Is it necessary to be? What makes somebody a peer? Or is it necessary to be the same age? I don't know.
Yes. Good.
I have a question that might build on that about identification and how you see identification working differently perhaps as a writer than as a reader or spectator, because I'm thinking about the moments in your talk yesterday where you spoke to the young Latino boy about Spider-Man 4 and then about King Kong. And you were saying, we might have both you might think, I think you said to the audience, that we might both have been looking for a Latino young person or an older black gay man in the films, but that's not what we were doing.
Yeah, and the genre did give both of us somebody to identify with, who was basically the character of Billy, the cabin boy.
But at the same time, you were just saying, why write about a 75-year-old? Because I am.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm curious about how you see that perhaps disjuncture, that you're seeking to put your own identity into writing in some way, but you're also recognizing a kind of cross-identification commonly as a reader, as a spectator.
Yeah, and you do notice when something is forbidden. When you suddenly realize there can't be, you can't see a 50-year-old. You can't see a 50-year-old Asian woman in a particular situation because for some reason it's not allowed. It's not allowed by the genre. And And maybe someone would want to. I don't know. I can see wanting to see a 75-year-old black gay man, you know. Yeah.
I can imagine you writing a whole story with like a male white hero.
I have.
And then at the end of it,
I have.
But at the end of it, say, okay, well now I've written that whole story. Now I'm going to switch it
Yeah,
to a
right.
young black.
Right. As soon as I got brave enough to put in a rocket ship, I wrote about a 26-year-old Asian poet. I was a 24-year-old black gay man with a Jewish white wife who was a poet, and I wrote about an Asian woman poet who ran a spaceship. You know, and it was fun. It was fun. Yes. I'm sorry. You're the one person.
Yes, go ahead.
Forgive me if this is something that you've already covered in one of the other events, but last weekend I read Bread and Wine.
Mm-hmm.
I was completely blown away by it.
Thank you. Yes.
I was very moved by it. I was in upstate New York and a friend had it. And I just think a lot about graphic novels and what, first of all, I think it's extra brave to put an autobiographical story into a graphic novel, not only because of the imagery and the intensity, but because you've handed off the visuals to somebody else.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the structure of your identity and of your lovers, it gets shaped by the fact it's a graphic novel. And, I don't know if you've already talked about.
No, I haven't. No, that's a book that I'm very fond of.
Any words that tumble out of your mouth would be
Right. Well, I keep on worrying whether Dennis is eating enough. Poor Bill has got to listen to me say, should I order him a pizza and make sure he's got something? As you know, and then I call him up and say, how are you doing? You got enough to eat? And he says, yeah. Okay. So. We're talking about the phone call, the last couple of phone calls.
What I'm really wondering about is what it meant to you to add this visual component, drawn visual component to your storytelling.
Well, all of them, they change things. They change them. Yeah, they change things. I think one can more or less leave it at that. I think. They do change things, and so they change things, and sometimes in surprising ways, and sometimes in surprising ways. You'll notice that at the end there is kind of a critique where the characters all get together and sit around and discuss what was done improperly, and the weirdest things get pointed out. I never would have noticed that Mia, the artist who did it, got the traffic going in the wrong direction on 72nd Street. Dennis went right to it. That's it. That's where he used to sell his books and what have you. And he got, I did notice that she managed to draw an accident at 42nd Street and 8th Avenue without making it clear that it was 42nd Street and 8th Avenue where the truck came along and hit me. It's and so you just tell all that. You tell that stuff. Yes.
I'm just very, very curious, having read Times Square Blue, what you would say about Times Square today.
Different. Yeah, it's different. That kind of stuff does not go on anymore. It's been taken over by internet pornography. It's been displaced by internet pornography, and I don't know what that means when finally all is said and done.
Can you speculate on that, though? What do you think it means?
Well, let me see. I don't know. No, I can't.
You have thoughts about that?
Maybe yeah. I mean, I don't.
Is internet pornography a network? instead of contact?
Well, it may be. It may have a. Well, it's interesting. One of the things that had happened is that in theaters, the pornographic film with a real plot was paramount, and now there are film clips with no plots. You know, is what dominates the what dominates the stuff, and then chat rooms and things of that sort, which bore the shit out of me, and so it's a lot of and then there are actual sex, like in I don't know, some of you may have seen my article Ash Wednesday about older gay men in the Boston Review, which is probably one of the more recent things that I published, and that's a whole different thing, and some of the film and two films that have been made about that particular group of guys that I went up to have to enjoy to participate in a sex party with, which a few months ago, which was interesting, it was interesting, and it was interesting to go to a movie about the same group of men and sit in the audience and see all these guys that I'd been screwing around with, a mere couple of weeks before, and because this guy named Charles Lum had made a documentary about that group in which there was a lot of explicit sex, so it was an interesting thing.
So on that note,
on that note, is there anything you'd like to say at the end?
At the end, well, I mean, I think, I've been wanting to just say thank you for your work and, acknowledge that what I think I said earlier, that I think that the work that you've done, the body of work that's around here, has given us a great deal to think about, to work through, to debate, to marvel at, right? And so I think that my own writing and my own work has traversed many of the themes that I've found in your book. And there's a lot more that I would love to talk to you about, but I'm not sure that people want to sit and listen to that
for hours,
any longer. But
sure.
But yeah, so
Well, we can all talk sort of more informally at the reception that's downstairs. So everybody's invited to that. Again, I do want to remind you that there's a film screening tomorrow evening of the Polymath, a documentary about Samuel Delany, as well as one of his own films. That's at 7 o'clock at the Granoff Center. And thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.